What if I told you that the person you believe yourself to be, the one watching through your eyes right now, doesn't actually exist? What if every single thing you've been told about identity, about consciousness, about who's really in control of your life, has been a fundamental misunderstanding? And what if discovering the truth about the real observer behind experience could completely transform how you move through reality? You've been living under the assumption that there's someone home behind your eyes, a central command center, a little CEO of consciousness making executive decisions and steering this biological vessel through time and space. But here's what no one tells you. That familiar sense of being the one in charge, the one who chooses, the one who remembers and plans and worries and dreams, it's actually a carefully constructed illusion. And the deeper you look for this supposed self, the more it begins to vanish like smoke. This isn't philosophy. This is the cutting edge of consciousness research colliding with ancient wisdom that's been pointing to this truth for millennia. And when you really get this, when you see through the illusion of the separate self, everything about how you experience reality begins to shift in ways that most people can't even imagine. Let's start with something that happened in a laboratory that should have shaken the foundations of human psychology. Picture this. A chimpanzee emerges from anesthesia to find a bright red dot painted on its forehead. When placed in front of a mirror, something extraordinary happens. The animal doesn't reach toward the reflection. It reaches toward itself. It touches the mark on its own forehead. In that single moment, science witnessed the birth of self-recognition, the emergence of what we call the me that can identify itself as separate from everything else. But here's where it gets interesting. This moment that researchers celebrated as the dawn of self-awareness might actually be the moment when the illusion begins. Because what if that recognition, that ability to say, "This is me," is not consciousness discovering itself, but consciousness creating a story about itself? What if the very moment we learn to see ourselves in a mirror is the moment we begin to mistake the reflection for reality? Every morning, you perform this same ritual. You look in the mirror and see someone you recognize, someone continuous, someone who seems to have an unbroken thread of identity stretching from yesterday into today and forward into tomorrow. The face looks familiar. The eyes seem to hold everything you call you. But what you're actually seeing is light bouncing off a surface, creating patterns your brain interprets as form. The deeper question isn't what you see, it's who or what is doing the seeing. And this is where modern neuroscience starts to unravel everything you think you know about being human. Dr. Michael Gazzaniga's research with split-brain patients revealed something that should terrify anyone who believes in a unified self. When the connection between brain hemispheres was severed, two distinct streams of consciousness emerged in the same skull. One hand would act independently of the other. Two different wills seemed to inhabit the same body, each operating with its own agenda, its own awareness, its own sense of being in control. Think about this for a moment. If you truly believe you are the singular consciousness behind your eyes, which hemisphere was the real you? The left? The right? Or were both just different expressions of something far more mysterious? This research suggests that even in an intact brain, what you call you might already be a collection of competing processes masquerading as unity. But the most unsettling discovery came when researchers began measuring brain activity during decision-making. Dr. Benjamin Liebert's experiments revealed that neural preparation for movement begins up to half a second before people report being consciously aware of their intention to move. Let that sink in. The brain is already preparing for action before the conscious mind even knows it has decided. The experience of choosing feels like commanding, but it's actually more like being informed after the fact. What this means is that the story of "I decided" is not authored by the one you think is behind your eyes. It's a narrative constructed after the decision has already been made, designed to maintain the illusion that there's someone in control. The sense of being the decider, the chooser, the agent of your actions, it's all elaborate theater performed for the benefit of maintaining a coherent sense of self. Identity feels solid because it rests on the foundation of memory. You know who you are because you remember who you've been. Your past flows into your present, creating the illusion of continuity. But what happens when we examine memory itself? Dr. Elizabeth Loftus's groundbreaking research showed that memories are not recordings, they're reconstructions. Each time you remember something, you're actually rebuilding it from fragments. And those fragments can be altered, contaminated, or even completely fabricated. People can develop vivid, emotionally charged memories of events that never happened. They can recall childhood experiences in perfect detail, complete with sensory information and emotional responses, even when those experiences are entirely false. If the foundation of your identity, your personal history, can be this unreliable, how solid is the sense of self that depends on it? Consider what happens every single night. You go to sleep, and for hours, the self completely disappears. There's no continuity of experience, no sense of being the one behind your eyes. And when you wake up, you simply assume that the person gathering the fragments of memory and continuing the story is the same one who closed their eyes the night before. But what actually connects the you who falls asleep with the you who wakes up? Only memory. And memory, as we now know, is not a faithful record, but a creative reconstruction. This understanding isn't new. Buddhist philosophy has been pointing to this truth for over 2,000 years through the teaching of anatta, the doctrine of no self. According to this view, what we call the self is like a river that appears continuous, but is never actually the same water from moment to moment, or like a flame that seems steady, but is constantly being renewed by fresh fuel. The appearance of continuity masks a constant process of arising and dissolving. Modern cognitive science confirms this ancient insight. Your sense of identity is not a fixed structure, but a dynamic process. Every time you recall a memory, it gets slightly modified before being stored again. Your mind is constantly editing, rewriting, and updating the story of who you are. The you that exists today will remember events differently than the you of next month. Which version is real? The answer is that both are equally illusory, stories created in the moment of remembering. This means that the continuous self you experience is actually more like a movie than a photograph. Each frame appears connected to the next, creating the illusion of smooth motion. But there's no single unchanging element that persists through the entire sequence. What you call yourself is a process, not a thing. A verb masquerading as a noun. Now let's go even deeper. Modern physics reveals something extraordinary about the nature of reality itself. At the quantum level, particles don't exist in definite states until they're observed. The act of observation literally collapses infinite possibilities into a single actuality. Observer and observed are so intimately connected that they cannot be separated. Consciousness isn't just witnessing reality, it's participating in its creation. Your brain operates on similar principles, It doesn't passively receive information about an external world. Instead, it actively constructs experience based on sensory input, memory, expectation, and belief. What you call the world is actually your brain's best guess about what's happening, updated moment by moment based on incomplete information. Colors don't exist in objects. They're interpretations of electromagnetic wavelengths. The apparent solidity of matter is a construction that allows you to interact with quantum fields in useful ways. Even your visual field, which seems seamless and complete, is actually assembled from fragments with significant blind spots that your brain fills in automatically. Neuroscientist Anil Seth describes this as a controlled hallucination, so stable and consistent that you rarely notice its constructed nature. But here's the crucial question. If your entire experienced world is generated by the brain, who is it being generated for? Who is the audience for this elaborate production? Who is the witness to this controlled hallucination that you call reality? Ancient wisdom traditions have always pointed toward this mystery. Zhuangzi famously wondered whether he was a man dreaming he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was a man. Buddhist meditation reveals that ordinary perception is like a veil, convincing but not ultimate. When advanced practitioners quiet the brain's default mode network through deep meditation, something extraordinary happens. The sense of being a separate self begins to dissolve, but awareness itself doesn't disappear. Instead, it's revealed as boundless, centerless, without beginning or end. This points to the heart of the mystery. If perception is a controlled hallucination, if memory is unreliable theater, if the self is just a story, then what you imagine to be behind your eyes isn't actually there. The self is part of the construction, not the constructor. What remains when the story stops is pure awareness itself, the silent space in which thoughts, emotions, sensations, and even the sense of self arise and dissolve. Here's what changes everything. Every attempt to find the thinker behind thoughts reveals the same paradox. Thoughts simply appear in awareness, remain for a while, then dissolve back into silence. There's no central headquarters where they're manufactured, no CEO of consciousness giving them orders. Emotions surge through experience like weather patterns through the sky. Powerful, temporary, without a permanent source or destination. Physical sensations rise and fall in endless waves, but there's no fixed experiencer to whom they belong. Even the sense of being the observer, the me who watches it all, flickers and shifts. Sometimes it feels solid, sometimes transparent, sometimes it disappears entirely. The harder you look for something permanent behind the stream of experience, the more elusive it becomes. What you discover instead is awareness itself, not personal awareness, not your awareness, but awareness as the fundamental ground in which all experience appears. Take a moment and comment below with this phrase: I am the space, not the content. This isn't just a declaration. It's an interruption in the loop of identification, a signal to the quantum field that you're ready to see beyond the illusion of separation. Feel this as an energetic shift, not just words on a screen. The implications of this understanding are staggering. If free will as commonly understood is an illusion, if the self is a story, if you're not actually the one behind your eyes, then who or what is responsible for the unfolding of your life? Ancient traditions offered different perspectives on this mystery. The Greeks spoke of fate as threads woven into human existence. Hindu philosophy described karma as the intelligent unfolding of cause and effect, often beyond individual comprehension. Modern research approaches the same conclusion from a different angle. Perhaps what you experience as personal agency is actually the localized expression of a much larger intelligence. Perhaps what feels like individual choice is actually the universe expressing itself through the unique configuration of awareness that appears as your particular nervous system. The sense of being a separate self making independent decisions might be the most persistent illusion consciousness creates to navigate the relative world. But here's where quantum mechanics reveals something even more extraordinary about the nature of reality and consciousness. In quantum field theory, what we call empty space isn't actually empty. It's alive with virtual particles constantly popping into and out of existence. This quantum foam, this field of infinite potential, is the ground from which all matter and energy emerge. And consciousness appears to operate on strikingly similar principles. Thoughts don't arise from a thinker. They emerge from the field of awareness like quantum fluctuations appearing from the vacuum. Emotions don't belong to an experiencer. They're temporary perturbations in the field of consciousness, arising and dissolving back into the silence from which they came. What you've been calling your experience is actually more like localized turbulence in an infinite ocean of awareness. This isn't just a poetic metaphor. Research in quantum biology is revealing that biological systems, including the human brain, may actually operate using quantum mechanical principles. Microtubules in neurons might function as quantum computers, processing information in superposition states before collapsing into classical neural activity. If consciousness itself emerges from quantum processes, then the boundary between observer and observed becomes even more blurred than we previously imagined. Consider what this means for personal identity. In quantum mechanics, particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until observation collapses the wave function into a single outcome. What if your sense of being a definite self is actually consciousness collapsing infinite possibilities into the appearance of a singular identity? What if the you think you are is just one potential configuration among countless others, temporarily stabilized by the act of self-observation? This begins to explain some of the most mysterious aspects of human experience. Have you ever noticed how your personality seems to shift depending on who you're with? How you can feel like completely different people in different contexts? What if these aren't just social adaptations, but glimpses of the quantum nature of identity itself? What if the coherent self you imagine is actually more like a probability cloud, temporarily collapsed into a specific configuration by the circumstances of the moment? The ancient Indian text known as the Yoga Vasishtha describes this beautifully. Consciousness is like an ocean, and individual minds are like waves, appearing separate and distinct, but never actually divided from the water that forms them. Each wave has its own shape, its own movement, its own temporary identity, but it's still just ocean appearing as wave. Similarly, what you call your individual consciousness is actually infinite awareness appearing as a localized perspective, a temporary focal point in the field of consciousness. This understanding transforms everything about how you relate to thoughts and emotions. When a disturbing thought arises, you don't have to identify with it or push it away. You can recognize it as a temporary perturbation in the field of awareness, no more personal than a wave is separate from the ocean. When intense emotions surge through your experience, you don't have to be overwhelmed by them or resist them. You can see them as weather patterns moving through the sky of consciousness, powerful, meaningful, but temporary. But let's go even deeper into the practical implications of this recognition. If the self behind your eyes is an illusion, what happens to personal responsibility? What happens to growth, to healing, to the very idea of working on yourself? This is where many people get stuck, thinking that recognizing the illusory nature of the self means nothing matters, that effort is pointless, that everything is predetermined. This is a fundamental misunderstanding. Recognizing that there's no fixed self doesn't mean that patterns don't exist or that transformation is impossible. It actually reveals transformation as the natural state of consciousness. Without a fixed self to defend or maintain, change becomes effortless, flowing, organic. The river doesn't struggle to flow. It simply follows the natural contours of the landscape. Similarly, when you stop trying to be someone specific, you become available to the intelligence of the moment. Here's what most people miss. The ego mind isn't the enemy to be destroyed. It's actually a remarkable evolutionary achievement, a specialized function of consciousness that allows for survival, learning, and navigation in the relative world. The problem isn't the ego's existence, but the mistaken identification with it as your true self. It's like confusing the software running on a computer with the hardware itself, or mistaking the character in a video game for the player holding the controller. When you recognize that the personal self is more like a sophisticated interface than your actual identity, everything becomes workable. Psychological patterns can be observed and transformed because there's no one to protect them. Limiting beliefs can dissolve because there's no solid self they need to define. Emotional wounds can heal because there's no permanent entity to carry them forward. The very things that seemed most solid about your identity become the most fluid. Now, what we've explored today is really just touching the surface of what becomes possible when you begin to live as the witness consciousness rather than the separate self. The recognition that you are awareness itself opens doorways to what I call the master frequencies. 9 distinct transmission states that allow consciousness to broadcast itself through your being with complete coherence. While today's exploration reveals the foundation of who you truly are, there's an entire system for embodying this recognition and moving from the frequency prison of separation into effortless creation as the field itself. You'll find this complete framework in my book, Beyond the Frequencies, A Quantum Guide to Consciousness Mastery. It's linked in the pinned comment below. This is why ancient traditions developed practices like meditation, contemplation, and self-inquiry. Not to improve the self, but to see through the illusion of the self. Not to make the ego better, but to recognize what you are beyond the ego. When you truly see that you are the awareness in which all experience appears, the question of personal development becomes, how can this understanding be embodied more fully? How can life be lived from this recognition, rather than from the story of separation? And here's something remarkable that happens when this shift begins to stabilize. The world starts to feel less like a place you're separate from, and more like an extension of your own being. Other people stop feeling like separate entities you need to defend against or impress, and start feeling like different expressions of the same consciousness you are. Problems don't disappear, but they're held in a larger context that makes them workable rather than overwhelming. Relationships transform when you recognize that there's actually only one consciousness appearing as many. The person you're talking to isn't separate from you. They're another localization of the same awareness you are. Conflict becomes less about defending separate positions and more about consciousness recognizing itself through apparent difference. Love stops being something you do for another and becomes the recognition of what you share at the deepest level. This shift also transforms your relationship with time and mortality. When you recognize that you are not the temporary form, but the eternal awareness in which forms appear and disappear, death loses its sting. The body will certainly dissolve, the personality will fade, the memories will be forgotten, but what you truly are was never born and will never die. You begin to see that you've never actually been in a body. Bodies appear in you, consciousness, like images appearing on a screen. This isn't a belief system or a philosophical position. This is the direct recognition of what's actually happening right now. The words appearing on this screen are appearing in your awareness. The sounds in your environment are arising in consciousness. The sensations in your body are modifications of the same awareness that recognizes thoughts and emotions. There's no separate you having these experiences. There's just experiencing itself, knowing itself, being itself. Let me give you a practical way to investigate this directly. Right now, notice that you're aware of these words. Now notice that you're also aware of the awareness that's aware of the words. Can you find a boundary between the awareness and what it's aware of? Can you locate the supposed observer separate from the observed? The more clearly you look, the more obvious it becomes that awareness and its contents are not two different things. They're one seamless experiencing, appearing as the dance between knower and known. This recognition doesn't require special states of consciousness or years of meditation practice. It's available right now, as obvious as the sky, as intimate as your next breath. The only thing that obscures it is the habit of looking for it, as if it were an object in awareness rather than awareness itself. It's like trying to see your own eyes, impossible when you're looking for them, obvious when you stop looking and simply see. But even as this illusion crumbles, something undeniable remains. Right now, there is awareness present, something that registers these words appearing in your visual field, something that recognizes the rhythm of breath moving through your body, something that witnesses the arising and dissolving of thoughts. This awareness is not the thinker, not the doer, not the collection of memories that form an identity. It doesn't belong to the passing phenomena that appear within it, yet it holds them all. When the story of the separate self dissolves into the flickering construction it always was, awareness doesn't vanish. It remains, steady, silent, unchanging. So the question deepens even further. If the thinker isn't really thinking, if the actor isn't actually acting, if the one behind your eyes is just another appearance in consciousness, then what is it that recognizes all of this? If this exploration is touching something deep in you, something that feels more true than the stories you've been telling yourself, then I invite you to subscribe.